Welcome guys to another first for my channel, another theory on another franchise that I honestly never thought I'd get to do a theory about. If you guys watched my fairly recent review of Star Wars The Force Awakens, you know that I am a huge Star Wars fan. Now granted, I haven't read everything in the expanded universe like some Star Wars fans have, but I also haven't been alive nearly as long as some Star Wars fans, so you gotta give me a break in some areas. Now in case you haven't seen it yet for some reason, I do want to point out that there are going to be fairly major spoilers for The Force Awakens in this theory video. So if you are a Star Wars fan and you just haven't gotten around to it yet, you might want to go and watch the movie first. But in the meantime, the rest of us will get right to the meat of the video. Basically what this theory is suggesting, and I'm sure someone else has suggested the same thing out there before as well, seeing how big the Star Wars fan base is, so you don't have to tell me if this has been said before. I know it's been said before. But the point of this theory is to suggest that R2-D2, the lovable droid character from the original 6 Star Wars movies, is sensitive to the Force. This may seem a silly prospect since droids aren't technically alive, but the more I think about it and the more I look into it, the more sure I am that this is actually true. And now I'm not saying he has the powers of a Jedi, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that like so many random members of the Star Wars universe who either don't want to become part of the Jedi Order or aren't quite gifted enough to become part of the Jedi Order, R2-D2 is sensitive to the Force and is able to, in part, manipulate it and use its abilities. A great example of a character like this would be Maz Kanata from Force Awakens. Because she is so long-lived, she seems to have learned enough about the Force to be able to tell certain things about people. But she is no Jedi. After all, it is a sort of heightened awareness that seems to be the most common power that the Force grants. One of the only reasons that Jedi and Sith are capable of wielding lightsabers to the speed and degree that they do is because the Force helps them to remain more aware of their surroundings than they could ever possibly be on their own. To prove the assertion that R2-D2 is also a Force-sensitive character, we have to look a little bit at his history and feats. R2-D2 has been around literally since the Star Wars saga began. He started out his journey with Heroes of the Star Wars universe as an astromech droid in the service of Queen Amidala. Over the course of his time with the Heroes, he showed uncharacteristic bravery, common sense, cleverness, and luck, and soon found himself adopted as Anakin Skywalker's personal astromech droid. He was made privy to Republic war secrets all throughout the Clone Wars, and was shown to be trustworthy with them. And he has been known to take advantage of the environment around him to defeat groups of enemies. He has witnessed the actions of countless Jedi, and seen everything from lightsaber duels to Jedi mind tricks. If he is Force sensitive, and even if his body doesn't give him the ability to do some of the things he's witnessed, just watching other Force users use the Force could help him to better understand the Force and his own capabilities. In the original Star Wars, it is, of everyone on the ship, R2-D2 who Leia entrusts the Death Star plans to, also trusting him to find and deliver them to the appropriate person at the appropriate destination. And after he and C-3PO land on the surface of Tatooine, he seems to know where that person, Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, is in hiding. Did Leia have coordinates to Obi-Wan Kenobi's hermit shack in the middle of the desert? It's possible, but I highly doubt it. Other people living on Tatooine didn't even seem to know exactly where he lives. And if R2-D2 had coordinates, don't you think he would have just given them to C-3PO instead of arguing with him about which direction they should go? It seems much more likely to me that R2-D2, being Force-sensitive himself, was able to sense the presence of other Force-sensitive people on the planet nearby. And seeing as how he knew Obi-Wan Kenobi, seeing as how they fought together in the Clone Wars, it makes sense that he would recognize Obi-Wan and be able to track him down. After all, unlike C-3PO, R2-D2 did not have his memory of everything that had happened wiped away at the end of Episode 3. He still knows everything. Another R2 scene that always got to me and really helped to hammer this idea home was in The Empire Strikes Back. R2-D2 was on Dagobah with Luke as he underwent his training from Yoda. Part of that training came in the form of a test. You may remember it was when Luke stepped inside of a terrifying cave and was met by a visage of Darth Vader that he defeated, decapitated, and then learned was actually himself. This was supposed to hint not only at his connection to Darth Vader, but at the fact that he had the same kind of darkness inside of him. And it's a very gripping scene. You're instinctively very gripped by what is happening to Luke. But have you ever paid attention to R2-D2 during that scene as well? Despite the fact that he has no more logical reason to be afraid of that cave than Luke does, he seems nervous and almost fearful, almost as if he can sense the evil within it. Seeing this scene years ago as a kid was when this theory started to form itself in my mind. But there is one scene which, above all others, convinced me that this is true. And that was a scene in The Force Awakens. But I'm going to save that one for last because, as it is the most recent movie to date, if you haven't seen The Force Awakens yet, I want to give you the opportunity to watch as much of this video as you can before turning it off, for those of you who haven't already turned it off and gone and watched the video like I suggested earlier. Anyway, first, let's look at the idea that droids aren't living beings. Why that might suggest that they can't be Force sensitive, and why I don't care. First of all, there's the idea that droids are just AI, that they aren't actually sentient or self-aware AI. And I can't prove definitively that droids are sentient and self-aware. It definitely does seem like some aren't, but then it does definitely seem like some are. One of the main cornerstones of self-awareness is the awareness of your own mortality, and R2-D2 and C-3PO both seem acutely aware of the fact that they can die. It seems to be a matter of different treatment. Some people in the Star Wars universe don't believe that droids can be self-aware, so they treat them like they aren't, and the droids behave accordingly. But look at R2-D2 and Anakin all throughout the Clone Wars TV series. Anakin treats R2-D2 like any other person, and R2-D2 likewise behaves like pretty much any other person. He is a legitimate character with legitimate opportunities to contribute to the story, and whose mortality is treated as a legitimate source of tension. It is definitely the intention of the writers that R2-D2 is alive. And The Force Awakens carries on this tradition. The droid character BB-8 is treated as just another character all throughout the film. But AJ, you might be asking, what about metachlorians? Can't they only exist in biological life forms? And to that I say, get out. Metachlorians was the dumbest thing that Star Wars ever did, and like the majority of the fandom and seemingly the entirety of the cast and crew working on the current movies, I don't consider metachlorians to be canon. Maybe at one point it was thought that metachlorians caused Force sensitivity, but that's just absolutely insane. The Force is defined as an energy field which flows through all living things, but the fact is, living thing in Star Wars, even discounting things like droids, is such a broad term. Living creatures in the Star Wars canon have such varying biologies that no microscopic organism could exist and thrive inside all of them. It's just not possible. Metachlorians were a mistake, and like any blatant mistake made by a work of fiction, I am perfectly happy with just ignoring the idea and pretending that it never happened. Sorry to be a little harsh there, but I just have really strong feelings about this particular subject. Anyway, moving on, another potential point of contention against this theory is the idea that droids simply can't be Force sensitive. After all, it's not like we've ever seen a astromech droid Jedi rolling past us on screen, or a protocol droid trying desperately to wield a lightsaber. So I went on a quest to explore whether or not such a thing is even possible, and while I can't prove 100% one way or another, I did do some research to try to determine whether or not the idea had ever been explored in Star Wars fiction before, and to do that I had to delve into the expanded universe. You may remember that in my analysis video defining what is canon, I mentioned that the Star Wars expanded universe used to be canon, but isn't anymore. But stories from the expanded universe are still being treated as valid Star Wars stories. And there's nothing to say that details from the expanded universe can't be reintroduced into the canon over time. After all, that's what Star Wars Rebels is doing by reintroducing the character of Grand Admiral Thrawn to the canon. Keeping that in mind, I introduce you to the concept of the Iron Knight, a specific subcategory of Jedi made up of shards, a species of silicon-based crystals, who were often installed into specially modified droid bodies so that they could interact with people and the world around them. Shards are legitimate sentient life forms, and just like all legitimate sentient life forms, even though they're non-biological, shards can be Force sensitive and can train in the ways of the Jedi. In fact, the Iron Knights were just that, shards who had trained to become Jedi, despite the fact that nowhere in their bodies could there exist metachlorians. But more compelling even than this, the somewhat apocryphal tale of R5-D4, otherwise known as Skippy. Now keep in mind that this is widely considered a non-canon tale even within the continuity of Star Wars Legends from what I understand, but it does suggest that the red astromech droid, who was almost bought by Owen at the beginning of Star Wars instead of R2-D2, was incredibly Force sensitive, even able to use Force telekinesis, and that he actually overloaded himself because he sensed that R2-D2 was integral to Luke becoming the savior of the galaxy. So obviously the idea is out there, and if one astromech droid can be Force sensitive, another one can be Force sensitive too. Which brings us to that scene. The one that I mentioned finally convinced me of this theory 100%, and this is your final spoiler warning. If you haven't seen Force Awakens yet, this is going to spoil the climax of the film. At the end of the movie, our new protagonist, Rey, returns to the Resistance base after finally having awakened her Force abilities. The Resistance has one portion of the map to Luke Skywalker, and they want desperately to find him, but can't without the rest of the map. Meanwhile, R2-D2 has been shut down for years, completely incapable of interacting with the world in any way, or at least any way typical to a droid, because clearly R2-D2 is still aware of what's going on around him, because it is at this time when Rey returns finally ready to make the journey to find Luke, that R2 powers himself back up and reveals that he has the rest of the map. Following the pattern of pre-existing Star Wars movies, Rey, the new protagonist, is the one chosen by the Force to reinstate balance. If R2-D2 is Force sensitive and that gives him a heightened awareness of everything around him, he would know this about her, and he would know when it was time to take her to the one who will train her, to take her to her master, to take her to Luke. With everything else that R2 does, I can come up with plausible alternative explanations. Maybe he's just cleverer than most droids because he has more knowledge than most droids. Maybe he's just really lucky. But here, I can think of literally no other explanation for what happened. It can't even be something along the lines of special programming, indicating when he should react because he had no way of knowing what was going on around him without the Force. As far as I'm concerned, this scene in a movie which more than any before has gone out of its way to portray droids as valid, self-aware, living characters makes it canon that R2-D2 is a Force-sensitive droid. However, I fully acknowledge that I don't know nearly as much about Star Wars as some people out there. So of course, if there is something that you know that changes this theory, that makes it impossible, or better yet, further illustrates my point, let me know in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this theory. It's a little bit different than anything I've done before, but I have been saying for a long time that I want to branch out more, and this is part of that process. Star Wars is a franchise that I've loved dearly since I was a kid, and I had so much fun making a theory about it. So much so that this is probably the longest theory I've made in a long time. If you're one of my regular viewers and this theory really wasn't your thing, I apologize, but more Steven Universe content will be coming, not only next Monday with my next Steven Universe theory, but throughout the majority of the rest of this week, so please stay tuned. As per usual, if you have a question for me related to Steven Universe, any of my theories, or pretty much just anything at all, you can head on over to my Tumblr page, link in the description, and leave me an ask. And to make sure that you don't miss any of my videos when they come out, be sure to like my Facebook page where I post links to each of my videos, and of course be sure to subscribe. If you are subscribed and you're not seeing every single one of my videos each week in your subscriptions feed, then I urge you to go and turn on notifications for my channel by clicking the bell-shaped icon next to the subscribe bar on any one of my videos. Either way though guys, thanks for watching.